007 Road to a Million launched in November 2023, Season 1 comprising of 8 episodes averaging around 50 minutes each, and seeing a bunch of different couples undergoing thrilling 007-inspired challenges whilst barely acknowledging that they're actually in a James Bond-themed show, with the format mandating that they, more often than not, culminate a challenge by answering a somewhat tedious multiple-choice question. Seriously, I went back and rewatched the first episode of Season 1. They spend 4 minutes worth of screen time on the name of Shakespeare's famous Scottish king, while Brian Cox watches on from some dark cupboard that they seemingly trapped him in to film all of his inserts over the course of a weekend. I think it's fair to say that the Bond fan community had notes on the overall format and presentation of Season 1, and from my own anecdotal experience, people either gave it a go and couldn't make it beyond the first couple of episodes, or like me, they persevered through a pretty lackluster start to see the series improve, but ultimately end on a complete anticlimax, with none of the pairs even getting near the £1 million prize. I guess the titular road is still very much under construction, am I right? Season 2 was coming whether we wanted it or not, but it did have the opportunity to refine the format, take feedback on board, and come back fighting, and it did, actually. I thought Season 2 was actually pretty great. And yet, despite all of the improvements, I do kind of feel like there's a very slim chance that this is going to come back for a Season 3, and I'm going to get into that a bit, but first of all, good evening, Mr. Bond fans. I wanted to talk through my experience with this latest season, where I think it vastly improved, and frankly, why I think Bond fans should actually give Season 2 a go, even if you didn't bother with Season 1. So first of all, just to talk about my own viewing experience with Season 2, I watched this kind of slowly, really. I didn't binge through all of the episodes. I watched them quite gradually, kind of as I would like any program like this. Since, this is the thing, I think that since watching the Season 1 of this show, I have, kind of gotten into some reality TV shows, generally speaking, if they're travel or food themed, I'm there. So for example, here on the BBC, I will watch Race Across the World. I think that that's a really great travel series. It sees couples, traveling from destination to destination. There's Destination X, which is a relatively new series, not quite on the same level of Race Across the World, but still, it's a game show and it involves people traveling around various countries, and I like to watch the scenery and hear bits about the country and all that kind of thing. And 007 Road to a Million definitely fits into that same kind of mold. It's a game show, but it's also a bit of a travel log at the same time. And so I was like, well, I'm under no deadline to get a video out on this, so I'll just watch it at a fairly relaxed pace. And I'm really glad that I did. I actually genuinely looked forward to watching episodes of this in a way that I maybe didn't so much with Season 1, but we'll get into why. First of all, the episodes are much leaner. I think that the editing is so much more improved. I mean, looking at the runtimes, for Season 1, as I say, the average episode is about 50 minutes. For Season 2 is about 35 minutes. There are some episodes that go a little bit over, but I felt the leanness of it actually worked a lot better. Again, going back to Season 1 and rewatching that initial first episode, oof, that's a slog. Going back to that, I was like, oh right, yeah, no, I really do get why a lot of fans didn't get past that. They started on a fairly soft challenge, I guess. It's a lot of the contestants trudging through the Scottish Highlands and then pulling a chest out of a bit of water and then answering a question. So it's not the most engaging of starts, and I understand that for Season 1 they probably did have the thinking that, okay, well, we're going to escalate the intensity of the challenges as the thing goes on, but this is the streaming era, right? And if you don't hook a viewer in the first, what are there are statistics on this, I think it's the first 2 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that, it's so easy for people to be like, you know what, I'm not really into this, I'm gonna watch something else. Season 2 started, the first couple of episodes are really, quite high-octane challenge stuff. Obviously the contestants have safety gear, helmets, harnesses, that kind of thing, but I know that they're not going to genuinely put people's lives at risk for the sake of a reality TV show, and nonetheless, I don't think that takes away from some of the bravery that you would need to have to do some of these challenges in episode 2, which I really liked. It's the Carver Media Group building that they have to go up and climb up some aerials and stuff on the very top of the building, and yes, they've got safety harnesses and everything. I know they're not going to die, but that's still, it takes some guts to do that. I was thinking wow, okay, I'm not sure if I would quite have the the balls, quite frankly, to do that myself. And I thought the challenges were quite well balanced between some of the more high-octane stuff, and then equally there are some much smaller scale challenges. There's one that's based on the scene in Skyfall where Bond has to shoot the little glass of whiskey off of Severin's head, and again, like, the whole episode is more or less like all the contestants together and taking it in turns to fire at the shot glass. And again, like, I was actually quite tense, dare I say, watching that, even though it was quite small scale. There's another challenge where it's literally kind of like guessing which card is going to be the highest on the table. Like I say, very sort of basic challenge, but I did think that the editing, the music as well, there's a lot of Bond scores being utilized in this, which, so when you've got music from the likes of John Barry and David Arnold to play with, it's kind of like, okay, great, you know, that's doing a lot of your legwork for you. But again, I thought, like, I got quite into these challenges. I was quite invested in, okay, who's gonna win, and I'll get on to talking about the contestants, you know, in a little while, but I was, like, quite invested. I had my favorites, and I cared about the contestants more in a way, in more of a way than I did the season 1 contestants, I'll say that. Actually, you know what, to hell with it, let's just get into talking about the contestants, because when I say that about the season 1 contestants, I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all. It felt, actually, with season 1 that they were making a bit of a, you know, an effort to cast people who weren't necessarily big reality TV personalities that you might expect from shows like this. Everyone seemed like very nice people, very affable. They were presented in that way as well. I remember thinking I would have liked to have seen more of the couple from season 1, which was the dad and his son. I thought that they had an interesting narrative through it that felt prematurely cut off. But otherwise, you know, I remember the Bone Brothers, of course, and I remember the two friends that went the furthest in the contest. But otherwise, I don't know if any of them left that much of a lasting impression on me looking back at it, like, what, nearly 2 years later. With this series, I felt like they went for bigger personalities, to the extent that I felt like they were, certainly with one particular contestant, I felt that the editing, you know, they were kind of setting him up as an antagonist. This is Alex, who I'm referring to, who was on the show with his husband, and there were just bits where, like, there is one episode where I can't remember the exact quote, I'll have to put a clip in, but it was something like, one of the other contestants sees him and then says something along the lines of, oh, well, every Bond needs a villain or something. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, they're referring to him as, you know, some kind of antagonist here.
If I get an opportunity, they're going.
You know, mate, everyone's got to have a nemesis, haven't they?
Yeah. It's not Bond without a villain.
And there were lots of bits where it was like that Marcus Brody cut to in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where Indiana Jones is like, Marcus speaks, you know, 25 languages, he's skilled in all these forms of martial arts and stuff, and I felt like there was, and then you cut to Marcus Brody and he's like, does anyone here speak English? And they were doing a fair bit of that with Alex. I feel like in every episode there was something where he'd sort of be talking about, like, I'm a, you know, a world-class gymnast kind of thing, and then it'd show him sort of, like, falling over or something like that, or like, I speak Thai, I'll take care of this, you know, thing, and then he'll get to the reception desk and be like, hello, you know, it was that kind of thing, which is something that I don't think they did so much in season 1. And again, just to say, when I say this, I want to be very clear here, I'm not talking about the contestants like on a personal level. I don't know any of these people, but I do know that with reality television, of course, so much is in the edit. If you film someone talking about how much they love dogs for 55 minutes, and then 5 minutes on, you know, how they kind of like cats, but you only show an audience the bit where he talks about cats, then they're going to come away with like, God, this guy really likes cats. And, you know, it's that kind of thing. It's that, again, the old Hitchcock thing of, like, you can take the exact same pieces of film of a man looking at something and smiling, and if you, in the middle of that, you know, of those two shots, put a image of a puppy, it's kind of like, oh, how sweet, he's smiling at, you know, a nice puppy. And then if you put, you know, a woman taking a top off to sunbathe, there's that. The exact same shots bookending that take on a whole new meaning, and all of a sudden he's a dirty old man looking at a woman taking a top off. So again, it's like, I always want to caveat thoughts and opinions on reality TV show contestants through that lens, because again, so much is in the edit. In terms of the other contestants, there were also Kat and Maya who were the two sisters who went on a bit of a narrative journey throughout the course of the series. And I actually, because in the first couple of episodes they're presented as very kind of like, oh, it's all just a bit overwhelming and they're flapping and all that, and they don't know if they can do it. And then by the end of it, they've gained a certain amount of confidence. I think Brian Cox at one point refers to them as the dark horses of the contest. And you do, I got really invested in them, actually, over the course of the series. By the end of it, I was kind of rooting for them to win. Another couple that I really liked were a pair of siblings, Assad and Jamila, and I think a part of this is probably on a personal level, because they're a brother and sister pair in their 30s from the north of England, and me and my sister are, in our 30s from the north of England, so I do think there was some semblance of relatability there, and I was like, what would me and my sister be like in this kind of situation? There's also Shabina and Sid, who I also really liked. They were very funny. They have some very memorable moments in the first couple of episodes. But generally speaking, I thought that the pairs were really, you've got some best friends, you've got siblings, you've got, married partners, and a father and a son, and so I felt like it was like, oh, okay, they're covering a lot of bases with the couples that they've got here. But yeah, you know what was also really good about this season is that they actually had the contestants in the same physical space together, which is something that I don't know. I don't think they did that at all in season 1. Season 1 felt like every single pair was filmed individually, and then all of Brian Cox's stuff was filmed, like I say, in some dark cupboard in a day, after all of the rest of the show was recorded. So everything felt kind of disjointed. It didn't feel like these people were going through the same journey, together. It didn't feel like there was any kind of rivalry. It was just everyone's just plodding along, trying to, go through each of these challenges and then answer a pretty dull question. The questions are still a part of the format here, but because it's part of an elimination kind of thing, it's like the slowest pair in each task kind of go head to head at the last, for a final round, and then a question is a part of that. But it was far more interesting than, who is Shakespeare's famous Scottish king. A lot of the question tasks were based on memory, so that was quite nice because you can kind of play along as well. And then there was a really cool instance in one of the first episodes where the tiebreaker was the couples were sat in a boxing stadium, and a couple of kickboxers came out, and they had to the question was about what particular move are they doing, and I thought, oh, that's a really cool and quite cinematic way to do this. It's not just two people hunched over a suitcase for 5 minutes sort of umming and ahhing about, oh, well, it could be that, or it could be that, or it could be that. Another really huge improvement, I thought, were the Brian Cox inserts. He's got an assistant now, which is really helpful because he has someone to actually talk to rather than just sort of musing aloud. But I also feel like, and I highly recommend checking out the Spy Hards podcast. They did an interview with Bruce Firestein, who of course worked on several Bond films and Bond games in the past, and he was brought on as, I can't remember exactly what his credit was, creative consultant or something like that, but he talks a bit in that podcast about how a part of his role here was to better define the Brian Cox character of the controller, because in season 1 he's they kind of present him as if he's sort of like a Bond villain who's getting some malicious joy out of putting these contestants through these challenges, I love watching them trudge through the Scottish Highlands. But he's spending his entire time in this dark, quite small room, mainly talking to the camera. He's got his little notebook, and you just sort of come away from season 1 thinking, what is this guy's deal? What is his problem? In season 2, they've kind of reformatted it a bit. He's less of a villain, and he plays almost like he's some kind of really tough recruiter character. And I felt like that. He's got a whole kind of MI6 style setup behind him in London with a bunch of people at screens. He's got his co-star now who's updating him on the times that the contestants are taking and all that kind of stuff. I felt like it was such a vast improvement, and also the fact that they actually have him interacting with the contestants. I'm pretty sure that they probably still filmed a load of his stuff at the end of filming, the main body of the show. I don't think his voice was literally on the phone to the contestants at the end of every single challenge. I think a lot of that will have been put in afterwards, just to minimize the amount of time that they would need Brian Cox on a set for, basically. But just the fact that he was there actually interacting with them, it's like one of the very first sequences you see is all of the contestants assembled in the same room, and Brian Cox walks in and sends them off on their mission, and it's like, oh wow, okay, great. I really wish that season 1 had started this way. They also brought back Nicholas Woodson, who's the interviewer in Skyfall, because they do have these inserts where they have him, talking to the contestants, and it's an excuse for the contestants to give you some details about their life, to contextualize certain decisions that they may make. This kind of insert is quite common, I think, in these kind of programs, and so I thought that the framing of that, of him sort of interviewing them in a room similar to Skyfall, as if it's some kind of like psychological evaluation, I thought that was a really nice touch as well. I'm gonna get into spoiler territory now for just a couple of minutes, so just because I want to talk about the very end of the series, I'm gonna put a little spoiler bar on screen, so if you want to skip ahead to hear my non-spoiler wrap-up of the series, then please do skip ahead and then come back and watch the spoiler bit if you care to do so after you've seen the full series. So at the very end of the series, we get down to our final couple who have made it through all of the various rounds, and then they meet Brian Cox in a moment, which I thought was kind of cool and also a bit funny because it just cuts to Brian Cox just like stood there in the darkness. And then the final challenge is basically the two guys have to they have a bunch of items in front of them, referencing back to moments on the process that they've been through, and they have to pick the item that they feel means the most, that has the most sort of sentimental value, ultimately, I suppose, to them, having taken part in this series, but they need to pick the same item, otherwise they won't win the million. And I know that this challenge hasn't necessarily been to everyone's taste. Maybe they should have ended on something a bit more high-octane, I guess, but I thought like boiling it down to something a bit more emotional, on a more of an emotional level, actually made a lot of sense. And I was like quite on the edge of my seat, like wondering if they were going to pick the same item and ultimately win, and they don't. So we have another season of 007 Road to a Million where the road never actually reaches a million. But nonetheless, they do win a huge sum of money at the end of it, and they go driving off in the Aston Martin from the living daylight, so that's all very nice. And, I wouldn't be complaining if I walked away from a TV series with £500,000. That'd be absolutely fine. But I was very disappointed with how the series ended. It was such like a quick and abrupt, like, Brian Cox turning to the camera saying, won't anyone ever win the £1 million prize? And then cut to credits, and I was like, oh, okay, I think I just needed more of a landing pad. I needed a bit more of, like, not necessarily for the contestants to all reunite and have a roundtable discussion for an hour, but to have some, like, brief snippets, perhaps talking, from each of the contestants involved about what being a part of this process meant to them as a couple, maybe what they, discovered something about themselves, that kind of thing. I just felt like it needed a bit more of a wrap-up in that regard. But just on the subject of them not winning $1 million, I do get that there has to be some element of will they or won't they at the very end of it. Like, just getting through to the final stage shouldn't necessarily mean that you're guaranteed the $1 million. The fact that there is the risk that the contestants could go away without it is, good for the stakes of the show and everything. So I'm kind of conflicted on that, like whether I think that's good or not. I think I would probably be less bothered about it if I felt like we were ever going to get another season of this, and I'm not sure if we will. So yeah, I suppose the main question now is the question that Brian Cox is going to be on the phone asking is, well, okay, if Season 2 of 007 Road to a Million is such a vast improvement on Season 1, and I really do think it is, like I say, I think if you haven't watched Season 1, if you gave up on Season 1, I think do check out Season 2. Like, I think it's a really good series. why, if it is such a vast improvement, do I think this will not come back for Season 3? Well, it boils down to two reasons. First of those being ratings. I know that this is a difficult thing, because with streaming, they don't release ratings like they used to with linear TV, and when they do release information, it tends to be number of minutes watched as opposed to number of people viewed, because I guess it's kind of... a lot of people will just click on something on streaming and then watch it for 5 minutes and then maybe give up. So the idea that that would count towards viewership is slightly misleading, so that's why a lot of streamers go for watch time instead, because that is a bit more of a indication of, okay, how many people actually stuck with this. I saw that the series did fall out of, certainly here in the UK anyway, it fell out of Amazon have, a top 10 shows, and this fell out of that list quite quickly, which I don't think is necessarily a good sign, because I even think Season 1 stuck around in that for a bit longer, but maybe that's as a result of this one feeling like... I felt like this promotion for Season 2 was minimal. I remember with Season 1, certainly here in London, there were ads on the side of buses. They put the first couple of episodes in cinemas. You could actually go and watch those initial disappointing episodes on the big screen if you cared to do so, and I don't feel like there was much or any of that for Season 2. And another reason for why I think perhaps a Season 3 is unlikely is that this show is a product of the old regime. Eon Productions were all over this, right? Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson were credited as executive producers, and since then, obviously, seismic shifts have happened in the world of 007, and now Amazon have full creative control, and you have to wonder, well, are they really going to stick with this thing that doesn't seem to be performing all that well, that was a product of a previous creative team? Do they have their own ideas for how they would put James Bond into a, streaming TV show space? I say all this, but I would actually be quite pleased if this did come back for Season 3, so I'm more than happy to be proven wrong in my assumptions, but I felt like this was such a great improvement. I feel like, oh good, you've got the format now. Like, there's not much that needs tweaking. I felt that it all worked incredibly well. But also with the time it took for a Season 2 to actually appear again, it was like, pretty much 2 years since the first season aired. So with the time it would take to produce something like this, and I can't imagine it's a cheap show to make either, with all of the various challenges that they have to do. And again, some of it's like really impressive, like some of the scuba diving stuff towards the end. I was like, wow, okay, this is, really quite impressive stuff, and they got like some kind of, warship that the contestants are on being dropped off on. I was like, whoa, this ain't coming cheap. But I just don't know if it's enough. I don't know if the show has made quite the impact that perhaps they initially hoped it would on Season 1. And yeah, like I say, I'm very happy to be proven wrong in this. I feel like 007 Road to a Million might well just become a sort of a curio of Bond history in a similar way, that James Bond Jr. did, to refer to another official James Bond TV series that just kind of happened and then swept under the rug. I do wonder if that's gonna happen here with Road to a Million. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Also below, links to my various social medias. Do follow me on a variety of platforms if you care to do so, and of course there is the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button, so do click those to stay up to date on future video uploads. And with all that being said, and until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.